I've never done this before, Neron whispered, her violet eyes fixed on Thomas Young. The human soldier felt his pulse quicken as the Iridian female's words sank in. He stood frozen, processing the implications of her request to mate. Thomas had been stationed on Iridia for 6 standard months, tasked with maintaining a tenuous peace between humans and the planet's native inhabitants. The blue-skinned Iridians were a mystery to most humans, their biology as alien as their customs. Now, standing before him in the shadows of the military compound, Neron represented both the greatest taboo and the most pressing necessity of her people. "You want to mate with me?" Thomas asked, his voice low and controlled despite the shock coursing through his system. He glanced around, ensuring they were alone in the shadowy alcove between buildings. Neron nodded, her antenna twitching nervously. "Our males are sterile. We must find mates from other species to continue our race. It is mandated by our government." The revelation hit Thomas like a plasma bolt. He'd heard rumors about the Iridians' unique reproductive needs, but to be confronted with the reality so directly left him reeling. The ongoing territorial disputes between humans and Iridians suddenly seemed trivial in comparison to this biological imperative. "Why me?" Thomas managed to ask, his military training kicking in as he fought to maintain composure. "I chose you," Neron replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Despite the cultural taboo against human-Iridian relations, I believe you are different, kind, strong." Thomas's mind raced. He had no experience with interspecies relations, let alone mating. The potential consequences of accepting Neron's request loomed large in his thoughts. Would it improve human-Iridian relations or spark a diplomatic incident? As if on cue, a shuttle touched down nearby, disgorging a group of human scientists. Thomas recognized Dr. Elena Vasquez, the lead xenobiologist. Her team had arrived to study Iridian reproductive biology, a fact that now seemed far more relevant than ever. "Those scientists," Neron said, following Thomas's gaze, "they seek to understand us. Perhaps their work could benefit both our peoples." Thomas nodded, torn between duty and the potential for a groundbreaking connection between their species. He remembered his training on maintaining professional boundaries during diplomatic missions, the warnings about potential biological incompatibilities echoing in his mind. The compound's speakers crackled to life. "Private Young, report to Captain Harris's office immediately." Thomas tensed. Captain Harris was known for his hardline stance against fraternization with aliens. If he learned of Neron's proposition— "I have to go," Thomas said, his voice tight with tension. "But this conversation isn't over. I need time to think." Neron's antenna drooped slightly, but she nodded in understanding. As Thomas turned to leave, she caught his arm. "Please, consider carefully. The future of my people may depend on decisions like this." With a final nod, Thomas strode toward the command center, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. He knew that his next actions could have far-reaching consequences for both species' futures on Iridia. As he approached Captain Harris's office, Thomas steeled himself for what was to come, knowing that the weight of 2 worlds now rested on his shoulders. Thomas's boots echoed through the corridors as he made his way to Captain Harris's office. His mind raced, replaying Neron's words and the implications of her request. As he approached the command center, he steeled himself for what he assumed would be a routine briefing. The door slid open, revealing not only Captain Harris, but also Dr. Elena Reeves, the lead xenobiologist. Thomas snapped to attention, surprise flickering across his face. "At ease, Private," Captain Harris said, his voice gruff. "We have a situation." Dr. Reeves stepped forward, her eyes bright with excitement. "Private Young, we've made a breakthrough in understanding Iridian biology. It seems human and Iridian genetics are far more compatible than we initially thought." Thomas's pulse quickened as he remembered Neron's proposition. "Sir, there's something I need to report." "Hold that thought, Young," Captain Harris interrupted, his expression grim. "The Iridians have learned of our discovery. They're demanding immediate human participation in their breeding program." The weight of the situation settled on Thomas's shoulders. He listened intently as Captain Harris outlined the diplomatic crisis unfolding around them. The Iridians threatened to revoke access to valuable resources, while some human factions pushed for military action. Unable to contain himself any longer, Thomas blurted out, "Sir, a Iridian female approached me earlier. She asked me to mate with her." The room fell silent. Captain Harris's face reddened with anger, while Dr. Reeves leaned forward, intrigued. "You were propositioned by a Iridian?" Dr. Reeves asked, her voice a mix of scientific curiosity and concern. Thomas nodded, feeling a bead of sweat form on his brow. "Her name is Niran. She said it was mandated by their government." Captain Harris paced the room, his boots heavy on the metal floor. "This is a breach of protocol, young, but—" He paused, a calculating look in his eyes. "It could also be an opportunity." Dr. Reeves nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. "Captain, what if we propose a small-scale, voluntary breeding program? Under strict scientific supervision, of course. Private Young could be our first participant." Thomas's head spun as he listened to Dr. Reeves outline her plan. A controlled environment, careful monitoring, and the potential to ease interspecies tensions. It all seemed surreal, yet he couldn't deny the logic behind it. Captain Harris rubbed his chin, considering the proposal. "It's risky, but it might be our best shot at diffusing this situation. Young, report to medical for a full examination. We need to ensure you're suitable for this endeavor." As Thomas left the office, his mind reeled with the implications of what had just transpired. In the span of an hour, he'd gone from a simple soldier to a potential key figure in human-Iridian relations. The medical bay buzzed with activity as Thomas underwent a battery of tests. Dr. Reeves supervised personally, her team working tirelessly to analyze every aspect of his physiology. "Fascinating," Dr. Reeves murmured, studying a holographic display of Thomas's genetic structure. "You have a rare marker that makes you particularly compatible with Iridian biology. It's almost as if you were made for this, Private." Thomas lay on the examination table, electrodes attached to his skin. "What exactly does that mean, Doctor?" Dr. Reeves' eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "It means you're our best chance at a successful interspecies breeding attempt. The risks are lower, and the potential for viable offspring is significantly higher." As the examination continued, Thomas learned more about Iridian physiology than he ever thought possible. The intricacies of their reproductive system, the challenges of interspecies conception, and the potential complications all swirled in his mind. Days passed, and word of the potential breeding program spread through the base like wildfire. Thomas found himself the center of attention, with reactions ranging from awe to disgust. Some soldiers clapped him on the back, calling him a pioneer. Others whispered behind his back, questioning his loyalty to humanity. In the mess hall, Sergeant Maxwell's voice rose above the din. "This is an abomination. We can't allow our genetic purity to be compromised by these aliens." Thomas kept his head down, focusing on his meal. He could feel the weight of Maxwell's glare boring into him. As preparations for the program continued, Thomas was reunited with Niran in the sterile environment of the research facility. Dr. Reeves and her team watched from behind a one-way mirror as the two faced each other. "I didn't expect things to unfold like this," Thomas said, breaking the awkward silence. Niran's antenna twitched, a sign of nervousness Thomas had come to recognize. "Nor did I, but I'm grateful for your willingness to participate. You're giving my people hope." The sincerity in her voice touched Thomas, and he felt a connection that transcended their biological differences. As they talked, supervised by the watchful eyes of the scientific team, Thomas began to see Niran not just as an alien, but as a person, complex, vulnerable, and brave. Meanwhile, Captain Harris received encrypted orders from Earth Command. The breeding program was to proceed, but with the utmost secrecy. The fate of human-Iridian relations hung in the balance, and Thomas found himself at the center of it all. As the day of the first mating attempt approached, tensions on the base reached a fever pitch. Thomas overheard whispers of Sergeant Maxwell planning to sabotage the program. Everywhere he went, he felt eyes on him, some curious, some hostile. In his quarters, Thomas sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at his reflection in the polished surface of his helmet. He thought about the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, the potential to bridge the gap between two species, and the personal journey he was about to embark upon. A knock on his door startled him from his reverie. It was Dr. Reeves, her face a mixture of excitement and concern. "It's time, Private Young," she said softly. "Are you ready?" Thomas stood squaring his shoulders. As he followed Dr. Reeves through the corridors, he knew that whatever happened next would change the course of human-Iridian relations forever. The air crackled with tension and possibility as they approached the secure facility where Neron waited. As Thomas followed Dr. Reeves through the corridors, the air grew thick with anticipation. The secure facility loomed ahead, its reinforced doors a stark reminder of the gravity of the situation. Thomas's heart raced, his palms clammy against the fabric of his uniform. Dr. Reeves paused at the entrance, her hand hovering over the biometric scanner. "Private Young, I need to ask you one last time. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed?" Thomas met her gaze, his dedication evident in his steady voice. "Yes, Doctor. I understand the risks and the importance of this mission." With a nod, Dr. Reeves activated the scanner. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a sterile chamber filled with advanced medical equipment. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing real-time data on atmospheric conditions and biological readings. Thomas stepped inside, his eyes immediately drawn to Neron. The Iridian female stood near a raised medical platform, her violet eyes wide with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Two Iridian officials flanked her, their posture rigid and formal. "Neron," Thomas said softly, approaching her. "How are you feeling?" Before she could respond, alarms blared throughout the base. Red emergency lights bathed the room in an eerie glow. Dr. Reeves rushed to a communication panel, her fingers flying across the interface. "What's happening?" Thomas demanded, his military training kicking in as he instinctively moved to shield Neron. Dr. Reeves's face paled as she processed the incoming information. "It's Sergeant Maxwell. He's launched an attack on the facility with a group of dissenters. They're using stolen Iridian weapons." The sound of distant explosions punctuated her words. Thomas's mind raced, assessing their options. He turned to the Iridian officials, who were already reaching for their communication devices. "We need to move," Thomas said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Dr. Reeves, is there a secure location within the facility?" The xenobiologist nodded, her eyes darting to a reinforced door at the far end of the room. "There's a bunker designed for emergency situations. It should hold against small arms fire." Thomas made a split-second decision. "All right, everyone move to the bunker. Dr. Reeves, grab any essential equipment you can carry. We might need to continue the procedure under less than ideal circumstances." As the group scrambled to gather critical supplies, Thomas activated his comm link. "Captain Harris, this is Private Young. We're under attack at the medical facility. What's your status?" Harris's voice crackled through the speaker, punctuated by the sound of weapon fire. "We're engaging Maxwell's forces near the main hangar. Hold your position, Young. I'm sending a team to secure the medical wing." "Negative, sir," Thomas replied, guiding Neron toward the bunker as Dr. Reeves and her team hurriedly disconnected portable medical devices. "We're moving to a secure location within the facility. I'll transmit the coordinates once we're inside." The group reached the bunker just as the sounds of fighting grew closer. Thomas ushered everyone inside, his training taking over as he quickly assessed their resources and secured the entrance. The heavy doors sealed with a resounding thud, muffling the chaos outside. Inside the bunker, tension hung thick in the air. Dr. Reeves and her team worked feverishly to set up their equipment in the confined space. The Iridian officials huddled in a corner, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Thomas turned to Neron, noticing the tremor in her antennae. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Neron nodded, her eyes fixed on the sealed door. "I never imagined it would come to this. All we want is to ensure the survival of our species." Thomas placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, surprised by the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric of her garment. "We'll find a way through this, Neron. I promise." As if in response to his words, Dr. Reeves let out a frustrated groan. "The attack damaged some of our specialized equipment. We'll have to improvise if we want to proceed with the procedure." Thomas joined her at the makeshift workstation, scanning the array of unfamiliar devices. "What do you need, Doctor?" Dr. Reeves ran a hand through her disheveled hair. "We need to recalibrate the genetic sequencer and jury-rig a containment field. Without Earth Command support, we're flying blind here." The mention of Earth Command sent a chill down Thomas's spine. He activated his comlink again, but only static greeted him. "Captain Harris, do you read me? Anyone on this frequency, please respond." Silence. Thomas turned to the others, his expression grim. "Communications are down. We're on our own." The realization settled over the group like a heavy shroud. Dr. Reeves resumed her work with renewed urgency, while the Iridian officials conferred in increasingly agitated tones. Niran approached Thomas, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thomas, I need to tell you something. The pressure my people face, it's more than just a reproductive crisis. Our entire society is on the brink of collapse. This program, it's our last hope." Thomas met her gaze, seeing the weight of her words reflected in her violet eyes. He opened his mouth to respond when a violent explosion rocked the bunker, sending equipment crashing to the floor. "They've breached the outer defenses," Thomas announced, moving to secure the door. "We're running out of time." As the sounds of battle drew nearer, Thomas knew he had to act. The fate of two species hung in the balance, and the next few hours would determine whether they forged a new future together or descended into chaos. With commitment etched on his face, Thomas turned to address the group. "All right, listen up. We have a job to do, and we're going to do it. Dr. Reeves, what do you need to get that equipment working?" As Dr. Reeves began outlining their improvised plan, Thomas's mind raced with strategies to neutralize Maxwell's forces and complete the mission. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: failure was not an option. An option. Gritting his teeth, Thomas turned to Dr. Reeves and Niran. "We need to act now. Doctor, what's our most pressing concern?" Dr. Reeves, her face illuminated by the flickering screens, replied, "Power stability and equipment functionality. Without a steady power source, we can't guarantee the safety of the procedure." Thomas nodded, his mind racing. "All right, here's the plan. We'll create a diversion to draw Maxwell's forces away from the medical facility. That should buy us enough time to complete the procedure and secure the data." He activated the damaged communication device, static crackling through the speaker. "Captain Harris, do you read me?" After a moment of interference, Harris's voice came through, barely audible. "Young? What's your status?" Thomas quickly outlined his strategy, coordinating with Harris to mount a joint offensive against Maxwell's rebels. As he spoke, he could see the mixture of fear and grit in Niran's eyes. "I'll lead a small team out of the bunker," Thomas explained to the group. "We'll use the maintenance tunnels to outflank Maxwell's forces and create an opening for Captain Harris to launch a counterattack." Dr. Reeves frowned. "And what about the procedure? We can't afford any delays." Thomas turned to Niran, his expression softening. "Can you handle things here with Dr. Reeves while I'm gone?" Niran's antennae twitched, but her voice was steady. "Yes, I'll do whatever is necessary." With a nod, Thomas gathered a small team of human and Iridian volunteers. They slipped out of the bunker, using Thomas's knowledge of the base layout to navigate the narrow maintenance tunnels. The acrid smell of smoke and ozone filled the air as they moved silently through the dimly lit passages. As they emerged near the main hangar, Thomas signaled his team to take up positions. The sounds of battle echoed through the corridors, growing louder with each passing moment. Taking a deep breath, Thomas gave the order to engage. The diversionary attack caught Maxwell's forces off guard. Thomas's team struck hard and fast, using stolen Iridian weapons to sow confusion among the rebels. In the chaos, Thomas spotted Sergeant Maxwell barking orders to his men. Without hesitation, Thomas charged toward Maxwell, dodging enemy fire and leaping over debris. The two men collided in a flurry of fists and grappling holds. Maxwell's face contorted with rage as he recognized his opponent. "Traitor!" Maxwell spat, landing a solid punch to Thomas's ribs. "You're betraying your entire species." Thomas absorbed the blow, countering with a swift knee to Maxwell's midsection. "You're wrong," he growled. "I'm saving two species." The fight was brutal and exhausting. Both men sustained injuries, but Thomas's tenacity gave him an edge. With a final, decisive strike, he knocked Maxwell unconscious, effectively ending the rebellion. As Captain Harris and his forces secured the area, Thomas rushed back to the medical facility, his heart pounding with urgency. He burst into the bunker to find Dr. Reeves and Niran hunched over the improvised equipment. "How are we doing?" Thomas asked, wincing as he caught his breath. Dr. Reeves looked up, her face etched with concern. "We're ready to begin, but the power fluctuations are getting worse. We don't have much time." Thomas moved to Niran's side, taking her hand in his. "Are you sure about this? The risks." Niran squeezed his hand, her violet eyes meeting his. "We have to try, Thomas, for both our peoples." With a shared nod of understanding, they took their positions on the medical platforms. Dr. Reeves initiated the procedure, her fingers flying over the controls as she monitored their vital signs. The air in the bunker grew thick with tension as the breathing attempt progressed. Thomas could feel a strange tingling sensation coursing through his body, unlike anything he'd ever experienced. He glanced at Niran, seeing a mix of discomfort and hope on her alien features. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the facility. Dr. Reeves's eyes widened as she read the incoming reports. "A Uridian extremist group has breached the outer defenses. They're heading this way." Thomas struggled to rise, but the medical equipment held him in place. "We need to abort," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "Wait," Dr. Reeves exclaimed, her eyes fixed on the data streaming across her screens. "There's something happening here. The genetic reaction between you and Niran, it's unprecedented. This could change everything we know about interspecies compatibility." As if on cue, the lights in the bunker began to flicker ominously. The medical equipment sputtered, its displays blinking in and out of existence. "The power's failing," Dr. Reeves said, her voice tight with urgency. "If we lose power now, we could lose all the data and potentially put both of you at risk." Thomas locked eyes with Niran, seeing his own fear and commitment mirrored in her gaze. The sounds of battle grew closer, punctuated by the whine of Iridian energy weapons. In that moment, Thomas knew he faced the most critical decision of his life. Abort the procedure and ensure their immediate safety, or risk everything to see it through to completion. The fate of human-Iridian relations, the future of the Iridian species, and his growing feelings for Niran all hung in the balance. As the lights flickered once more, threatening to plunge them into darkness, Thomas opened his mouth to give his answer, knowing that whatever he chose would irreversibly alter the course of history for both their species. "We continue," Thomas said firmly, his eyes meeting Dr. Reeves's anxious gaze. "The risks are too great to stop now." Dr. Reeves nodded, her fingers flying over the controls as she fought to maintain stability in the face of the failing power systems. "I'll do everything I can to keep us operational," she said, her voice tight with concentration. Niran's antennae twitched as she processed Thomas's decision. Without hesitation, she reached out and grasped a nearby control panel, her slender fingers dancing across the alien interface. "I can help stabilize the energy flow," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos surrounding them. "Iridian technology is designed to adapt to fluctuating power sources." As Niran worked, the erratic hum of the medical equipment began to smooth out, the lights steadying to a constant glow. Dr. Reeves shot her an appreciative glance before turning back to her monitors. "The genetic reaction is progressing," she announced, her eyes widening as she studied the incoming data. "It's extraordinary. I've never seen anything like this before." Thomas felt a strange tingling sensation spread throughout his body, intensifying with each passing moment. He turned his head to look at Niran, seeing her violet eyes fixed on him, filled with a mixture of wonder and concern. Suddenly, a violent tremor shook the facility, causing the lights to flicker ominously. The distant sound of explosions echoed through the walls, a stark reminder of the battle raging outside. "Captain Harris, what's your status?" Thomas called into his comm unit, wincing as a wave of discomfort washed over him. Harris's voice crackled through the speaker, punctuated by the sound of weapon fire. "We're engaged with the extremist forces near the main hangar. They're putting up one hell of a fight, young. How much longer do you need?" Before Thomas could respond, Dr. Reeves cut in. We can't rush this, Captain. The procedure is at a critical stage. Interrupting now could have catastrophic consequences for both Thomas and Niran. As if to emphasize her point, Thomas let out a sharp gasp. His skin began to tingle more intensely, and he watched in astonishment as his arms seemed to shimmer, the pigmentation shifting to a pale lavender hue. "Doctor," he managed, his voice strained. "What's happening to me?" Dr. Reeves' eyes darted between her screens and Thomas's changing form. "The genetic fusion. It's not just affecting your DNA, it's triggering a physical transformation." Niran reached out, her fingers intertwining with Thomas's as his skin continued to change. "I can feel it too," she whispered. "It's like we're becoming something new, together." Another explosion rocked the facility, this one closer than before. The main lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. For a heart-stopping moment, the only sound was the labored breathing of the room's occupants. Then with a low hum, the emergency power kicked in, bathing the room in a soft blue glow. Dr. Reeves let out a relieved sigh, her fingers already moving to recalibrate the equipment. "We're on emergency power," she announced. "I don't know how long it will hold. We need to finish this now." Thomas nodded, gritting his teeth against the waves of sensation coursing through his body. He turned to Niran, about to speak, when a strange clarity washed over him. He could sense her thoughts, her emotions, as clearly as if they were his own. "Niran," he thought, testing this newfound connection. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Thomas, how? I can hear you, in my mind." As they marveled at this unexpected development, Dr. Reeves's voice cut through their silent exchange. "It's done," she said, her tone a mixture of exhaustion and awe. "The procedure is complete." Thomas sat up slowly, his body feeling simultaneously familiar and alien. He looked down at his hands, now a mottled mix of his original skin tone and Niran's lavender hue. Beside him, Niran was doing the same, her antennae twitching with heightened sensitivity. "How do you feel?" Dr. Reeves asked, approaching them with a medical scanner. "Different," Thomas replied, his voice slightly altered. "But stronger, somehow." Niran nodded in agreement. "Our minds are linked," she added. "We can share thoughts, knowledge." Dr. Reeves was about to respond when the comm unit crackled to life. "Young," Harris's voice came through, urgent and strained. "We're pinned down near the main power core. The extremists are threatening to destroy it. If they succeed, the entire base will be uninhabitable," Niran finished, the information flowing from her mind to Thomas's. Thomas stood, surprised by the newfound grace and strength in his movements. "We need to stop them," he said, looking at Niran. "Together." She nodded, rising to stand beside him. "Our bond gives us an advantage they won't expect." Dr. Reeves stepped forward, concern etched on her face. "You can't be serious. We have no idea how stable your condition is. You need to rest, to be studied." Thomas shook his head. "There's no time, Doctor. Every second we delay puts more lives at risk." He turned to Niran, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. "Are you ready?" "Always," she replied, both aloud and in his mind. As they moved towards the exit, Thomas paused, a wave of dizziness washing over him. Niran steadied him, her touch sending a jolt of shared energy through their connected minds. "We'll face this together," she thought to him. "Human and Iridian, something new." Thomas nodded, drawing strength from their bond. As they stepped out into the chaos of the embattled base, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as one. The future of human-Iridian relations, and perhaps the future of both their species, now rested in their uniquely joined hands. Thomas and Niran stepped out into the chaos of the embattled base, their newly forged bond humming with shared energy and purpose. The corridor before them was a maze of flickering lights and acrid smoke, punctuated by the distant sounds of weapon fire and shouted orders. "We need to get to the main power core," Thomas said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar resonance. He felt Niran's agreement echo through their mental link. As they moved swiftly through the base, Thomas marveled at his newfound agility. His body responded with a fluidity he'd never experienced before, effortlessly dodging debris and navigating tight corners. Beside him, Neron moved with equal grace, her antennae twitching as she processed their shared sensory input. They rounded a corner and came face to face with a group of Iridian extremists. Before Thomas could react, Neron's mind flooded his with tactical data. Without a word, they moved in perfect synchronization. Thomas ducked low, sweeping the legs out from under the nearest attacker, while Neron disarmed another with a precise strike to a nerve cluster Thomas didn't know existed. In seconds, the extremists were incapacitated. Thomas looked at Neron, a grin spreading across his mottled face. "That was incredible," he said, both aloud and through their link. Neron's violet eyes sparkled with excitement. "Our combined knowledge and abilities give us a significant advantage," she replied, her thoughts tinged with pride. As they approached the power core, the sounds of battle intensified. Thomas tapped his comm unit. "Captain Harris, what's your status?" Harris's voice came through, strained and breathless. "Young, we're pinned down near the core's entrance. Maxwell's got a team trying to breach the main doors. We can't hold them off much longer." Thomas exchanged a glance with Neron. "We're on our way, Captain. Hold your position." They quickened their pace, their joined minds formulating a plan as they ran. As they neared the power core, Thomas felt a surge of familiar rage. Sergeant Maxwell stood at the center of a group of rebels, barking orders as they attempted to bypass the core's security protocols. "Neron," Thomas thought, "can you access the base's security systems from here?" Her antennae twitched as she processed the request. "Yes, I believe so. What do you have in mind?" Thomas quickly outlined his plan. Neron nodded, her fingers already moving across a nearby control panel. As she worked, Thomas stepped out into the open, drawing the attention of Maxwell and his men. "Maxwell," he called out, his altered voice echoing through the chamber. "This ends now." Maxwell spun around, his eyes widening in shock as he took in Thomas's transformed appearance. "What the hell are you?" he snarled, raising his weapon. Thomas didn't answer. Instead, he charged forward, moving with inhuman speed. Maxwell fired, but Thomas was already gone, rolling to the side and coming up behind one of the rebels. With strength he'd never possessed before, Thomas disarmed the man and tossed him into his comrades. Maxwell roared in frustration, abandoning his weapon and rushing at Thomas with fists raised. As they collided, Thomas felt the full force of his enhanced physiology. He absorbed Maxwell's punch without flinching, then countered with a strike that sent the sergeant stumbling backward. "You don't understand what you're fighting for," Thomas said, circling his opponent. "This isn't about betraying humanity. It's about saving two species." Maxwell spat blood, his eyes wild with fury. "You're a freak, Young, a traitor to your own kind." As they grappled, Thomas sensed Neron's success through their link. Suddenly, the lights in the chamber flickered, and the security doors began to open and close in a random pattern. The rebels, caught off guard, scattered in confusion. Captain Harris seized the opportunity, leading his mixed force of humans and Iridians in a coordinated assault. Thomas saw the surprise on Maxwell's face as he witnessed the two species fighting side by side. Taking advantage of Maxwell's distraction, Thomas executed a complex takedown move that Neron fed directly into his mind. In seconds, Maxwell was on the ground, disarmed and subdued. As Harris and his team secured the area, Thomas rushed to the power core's control panel. The damage from the firefight had destabilized the containment systems, and warning lights flashed ominously across the displays. "Neron, I need your help," Thomas called, both vocally and mentally. She was at his side in an instant, her hands joining his on the controls. Together they worked in perfect harmony, their shared knowledge allowing them to navigate the complex systems with unprecedented speed and accuracy. Thomas found himself inputting commands for Iridian technology he'd never seen before, while Neron seamlessly integrated human failsafes into the power grid. As the last sequence fell into place, the core's angry hum subsided to a steady pulse. Thomas let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, feeling Neron's relief mingling with his own. Captain Harris approached, his expression a mix of awe and concern. "I don't know what you two have become," he said, eyeing their altered appearances. "But I'm damn glad you're on our side." Before Thomas could respond, a new voice crackled over the comm system. "Attention all personnel. This is Dr. Reeves. I've completed my initial analysis of the genetic fusion data. The results are extraordinary. We may have just found the key to solving the Iridian reproductive crisis." A ripple of excitement passed through the assembled Iridians. Even some of the captured rebels looked up with newfound interest. Harris nodded grimly. "That's going to change everything. But we're not out of the woods yet. We've got reports of a Iridian extremist group led by someone named Zor heading this way. They're not going to like this news one bit." Thomas felt Niran's concern pulse through their link. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We'll face them together," he said, meeting her eyes. "All of us." As if in response to his words, a human soldier helped a wounded Iridian to his feet, supporting him as they moved towards the makeshift medical area. Thomas saw Maxwell watching the scene, confusion and doubt clouding his features. Harris began issuing orders, organizing their combined forces to repel the coming attack. As Thomas and Niran joined the preparations, they knew that the next few hours would determine not just their fate, but the future of human-Iridian relations. The base's warning klaxons began to sound, signaling the approach of Zor's forces. Thomas felt a surge of drive flow between him and Niran. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as one, a living embodiment of what their two species could become together. The klaxons continued to blare as Thomas and Niran prepared for the coming assault. Their genetic bond hummed with shared energy, their minds working in tandem to formulate strategies and contingencies. As they moved through the corridors, coordinating with Captain Harris and the mixed human-Iridian defense force, Thomas couldn't help but marvel at how seamlessly they now worked together. Days turned into weeks as the immediate crisis on Iridia subsided. The combined efforts of humans and Iridians had successfully repelled Zor's forces, and a fragile peace settled over the base. But for Thomas and Niran, a new challenge loomed on the horizon. "Earth Command has issued a recall order," Captain Harris informed them, his face grim as he handed Thomas a datapad. "They want you back on Earth for evaluation." Thomas felt a surge of anxiety from Niran through their bond. He reached out, both physically and mentally, to reassure her. "What about Niran?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Harris shook his head. "The order only mentions you, Thomas. I'm afraid they view your condition as a matter of human concern." "That's unacceptable," Thomas said, his voice carrying an edge that surprised even him. "Niran and I are bonded now. We're stronger together. Separating us could be dangerous, not to mention counterproductive to everything we've achieved here." Harris nodded, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've been in talks with some sympathetic parties on both sides. There's a proposal in the works for a permanent joint mission here on Iridia, with you two at its center." Thomas felt a rush of hope from Niran, mirroring his own. "A joint mission? That could be exactly what we need to keep the momentum going." As they discussed the potential of the mission, Dr. Reeves burst into the room, her eyes wide with excitement. "I've done it," she exclaimed, waving a holographic data display. "I've found a way to replicate the genetic fusion process." The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. Thomas and Niran exchanged a look, their shared thoughts a whirlwind of possibilities and concerns. Dr. Reeves continued, barely pausing for breath. "It's a more controlled method, safer than what you two went through. This could be the solution to the Iridian reproductive crisis, and it might offer benefits for humans as well. Enhanced physical abilities, disease resistance." As news of the breakthrough spread, the base became a hive of activity. Transmissions from Earth and Iridia flooded in, filled with a mix of excitement, skepticism, and outright hostility. Thomas watched as protests erupted on view screens, showing crowds in major cities on both worlds. "This is bigger than us now," Niran said, her thoughts intertwining with Thomas's. "We need to do something." Thomas nodded, an idea forming in their shared consciousness. "We need to show them what's possible, not just tell them, but demonstrate it." Over the next few days, Thomas and Niran participated in a series of public appearances and interviews, broadcast simultaneously to Earth and Iridia. They showcased their enhanced abilities, solving complex problems in real time and performing physical feats that left audiences stunned. During one particularly memorable demonstration, they navigated a holographic maze designed to be impossible for either humans or Iridians alone. With their combined knowledge and instincts, they completed it in record time, their movements so perfectly synchronized that they seemed to dance through the obstacles. As public opinion began to shift, Thomas sensed a growing unease through his bond with Neron. "Something's wrong," she thought to him during a brief moment alone. Before Thomas could respond, Captain Harris approached them, his face etched with concern. "We've intercepted communications from a joint human-Iridian extremist cell," he said in a low voice. "They're planning to assassinate you both." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine, matched by Neron's mental recoil. "Who are they?" he asked. "A mix of Maxwell's old crew and some of Zor's followers," Harris explained. "They see you as a threat to the purity of both species. We're implementing new security measures immediately." As they moved through the base under the watchful eyes of a mixed security team, Thomas and Neron found themselves at the center of a storm that was reshaping two worlds. News came that the Iridian government, in cooperation with Earth's leadership, was organizing a summit to discuss the future of human-Iridian relations and the implementation of the breeding program. "They want us to speak at the summit," Neron said, reviewing the invitation on a datapad, "along with Dr. Reeves and Captain Harris." Thomas nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on their shoulders. "This could be our chance to really make a difference, to show everyone what we can achieve together." As they prepared for the summit, Dr. Reeves insisted on conducting additional tests to monitor the ongoing changes in their hybrid DNA. "Your bond is still evolving," she explained, studying the results with a mix of fascination and concern. "It's granting you new abilities, but there are also some unexpected developments we need to keep an eye on." The day of the summit arrived, bringing with it a palpable tension. As Thomas and Neron made their way to the conference hall, surrounded by their security detail, they both felt a growing sense of unease. "Something's not right," Neron thought, her antennae twitching nervously. Thomas nodded, his enhanced senses on high alert. Through their bond, they began to piece together subtle inconsistencies in their surroundings, a guard's stance that was slightly off, a service droid moving against the flow of foot traffic. As they entered the main hall, filled with delegates from both worlds, Thomas caught a glimpse of movement in his peripheral vision. Without a word, he and Neron sprang into action, their bodies moving in perfect harmony. Thomas tackled a delegate who had been reaching for a concealed weapon, while Neron disarmed another with a precise strike. Chaos erupted in the hall as more assassins revealed themselves, their disguises falling away. As security forces rushed to respond, Thomas and Neron found themselves at the center of a swirling melee. Their shared consciousness worked overtime, processing threats and formulating responses, faster than either of them could have done alone. "We need to contain this," Thomas thought, ducking under a wild swing from an attacker, without causing a diplomatic incident. Neron's agreement flowed through their bond as they worked to subdue the assassins without lethal force. Their enhanced abilities allowed them to anticipate attacks and react with superhuman speed and precision. As the last of the attackers fell, Thomas and Neron stood back to back, breathing heavily. The hall was silent, every eye fixed on the hybrid couple who had just saved the summit from disaster. Captain Harris stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe this unfortunate incident has demonstrated, more clearly than any speech could, the potential of human-Iridian cooperation." As the delegates murmured in agreement, Thomas met Neron's eyes. They both knew that this was just the beginning. The summit would go on, and with it, the chance to shape the future of both their species. But as they prepared to address the assembled leaders, they also knew that greater challenges and opportunities lay ahead. Ahead lay right before them. As Thomas and Neron stepped onto the stage, the weight of two worlds' expectations pressed upon their shoulders. The conference hall buzzed with anticipation. A sea of human and Iridian faces turned towards them. Thomas felt a subtle shift in Neron's posture through their bond. Her antennae twitched imperceptibly, a sign that would have gone unnoticed by anyone else. But to Thomas, it was as clear as a shout. Danger, Neron's thoughts whispered in his mind. Without breaking stride, Thomas scanned the room. His enhanced vision picked up minute details. A bead of sweat on a delegate's brow, the slight bulge of a concealed weapon under a jacket. He sent a mental image to Neron, who confirmed his suspicions. As they reached the podium, Thomas caught Captain Harris's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. The captain's hand moved to his communicator, initiating a silent security sweep. "Distinguished delegates," Thomas began, his voice steady despite the tension thrumming through his body. "We stand before you today as living proof of what our two species can achieve together." Neron seamlessly took over, her melodious voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Our journey began as an accident, a twist of fate that merged our DNA. But what started as a scientific anomaly has become so much more." As they spoke, weaving their tale of unexpected love and groundbreaking discovery, Thomas kept his senses attuned to the room. He felt Neron doing the same, their shared awareness creating a protective bubble around them. Midway through their speech, Thomas spotted movement in his peripheral vision. A delegate in the third row shifted, his hand reaching inside his jacket. In that instant, Thomas knew. Without missing a beat in their presentation, Thomas placed his hand on Neron's waist, guiding her into a seemingly natural step to the side. The motion was smooth, practiced, a dance they had perfected in their training sessions. The crack of a plasma discharge filled the air. Where Thomas and Neron had stood a split second before, the podium exploded in a shower of splinters. Chaos erupted. Delegates scrambled for cover as more assassins revealed themselves. Captain Harris and his security team sprang into action, energy weapons blazing. Thomas and Neron moved as one, their bodies flowing around each other in a deadly ballet. Thomas caught the wrist of an attacker, using his enhanced strength to flip the assassin over his shoulder. Neron ducked under a wild swing, her fingers finding a precise point on her assailant's neck. The Iridian dropped like a stone. Through the melee, Thomas caught sight of Dr. Reeves. Protected by a ring of security personnel, she stood at her station, calmly continuing her presentation on genetic fusion. Her voice, amplified by the room's acoustics, cut through the chaos. As you can see from these charts, the potential benefits of controlled genetic fusion are staggering. Increased longevity, resistance to disease, enhanced cognitive function. The juxtaposition was surreal. Groundbreaking science being discussed as a battle raged around them. Thomas saw several delegates, even as they took cover, leaning forward to catch Dr. Reeves's words. A familiar face caught Thomas's eye, Sergeant Maxwell's former second-in-command. The man's hands moved towards a device on his belt. "Bomb!" Thomas's mind screamed. The warning transmitted instantly to Neron. But they were too late. The explosion rocked the building, sending a shower of debris raining down. As the dust settled, Thomas saw that a section of the ceiling had collapsed, trapping several delegates. Without hesitation, Thomas and Neron rushed to the rescue. Their enhanced strength allowed them to lift chunks of rubble that would have required multiple people. Their shared consciousness let them work in perfect coordination, creating a steady flow of survivors being pulled from the wreckage. As Thomas helped a Iridian delegate to her feet, he heard a voice that made him freeze.
"Enough!"
The command cut through the din. Thomas turned to see Zor, the notorious extremist leader, standing atop an overturned table. But instead of the hate Thomas expected to see in the Iridian's eyes, he saw something else. Wonder. "I have been blind," Zor continued, his voice carrying across the now silent hall. "I came here today to stop what I saw as an abomination. But what I've witnessed, the bravery, the selflessness, the sheer potential of our combined species, it cannot be denied." Thomas felt Neron's surprise mirroring his own as Zor knelt down, laying his weapon on the ground. "I renounce my former beliefs," Zor declared, "and I pledge my support to this program of cooperation and mutual growth." The impact of Zor's words rippled through the room. Thomas saw humans and Iridians alike lowering their weapons, staring at each other with new eyes. As medical teams moved in to treat the injured, Thomas pulled Neron close. Through their bond, he felt her exhaustion, her relief, and underlying it all, a profound sense of hope. We did it, Neron thought, her mental voice tinged with awe. Thomas nodded, surveying the scene around them. Humans and Iridians working side by side to clear debris and tend to the wounded. Dr. Reeves deep in conversation with a group of delegates, her hands moving animatedly as she explained her findings. And at the center of it all, Captain Harris, already coordinating with both human and Iridian security forces to establish a joint protective detail. Thomas knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, obstacles to overcome. But as he stood there, Neron's hand in his, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The future they had dreamed of was finally within reach.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.